the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday afternoon. I know for some of you it's evening. We have somebody here from Amsterdam, so where it's quite late at night already. So great to be with you. I actually gave a talk this morning, very early this morning in London. 4-minute talk. I think people were not happy. I gave a talk about a very, very supportive of capitalism, and I could see people's faces like, what is he talking about? But I did it in 4 minutes, so for what it's worth. Hopefully we created some cognitive dissonance, and some of them will look it up and get educated a little bit about capitalism. But that was London. It was 6 a.m. this morning here in California. Okay. We have, what are we doing today? We're talking kind of, a news roundup kind of thing. We've got a bunch of different things to talk about. AOC as part of the Democratic civil wars that are already beginning, Republican civil wars that are heating up. Of course, COVID baby bust. Turns out you guys are not having sex during COVID. Or maybe you're having sex, but just using precautions. And we'll talk about the North Face and fossil fuels and what's going on with there. As an example of the kind of impact we can have. A courageous oil company CEO. That's something you don't expect to hear. Courageous oil company CEO standing up for fossil fuels in an era where it's very difficult to do. All right. Static sound? You guys are getting static sound? Everybody sound good for everybody? Anybody with problems with the sound? All right, let me know if it's just Matt. I don't see anybody else complaining, so I'm assuming everything's good here. All right, we're gonna jump in with the Democratic Party. Democratic Party is governing party, I guess, at least for now. Will be. Biden is going to be president on January 20th, and they control the House, although with a margin that has shrunk, surprisingly, fewer House members, and a Senate which they expected to win, and they didn't. So a lot of soul searching going on in the Democratic Party. You saw Biden, I guess an audio tape from an internal meeting where he blamed the losses in the House and the losses in the Senate on the defund the police movement, so on really Black Lives Matter movement, on the kind of progressive wing of the Democratic Party. His appointments, if you look at his appointments to cabinet, his appointments to different agencies, basically these all ex-Obama people. Obama, who's considered today in the Democratic Party a centrist. Obama, who criticized the whole kind of critical race theory, kind of nuttiness of the far left. So it's really people from his administration who are entering the Biden administration, and the Democratic Party is clearly making an effort, at least, to appear to be centrist through Joe Biden and Joe Biden's appointments. This is, of course, very disturbing to the progressive left. It's very disturbing and I hate to call them progressives. God, I hate to call them progressives. There's nothing progressive about the left today. I mean, the progressives are regressives. That's what we should call them. So this is very upsetting to the regressive left, who want a much more radical agenda, who want much more say in the governing of the future. But of course, many people within the Democratic Party are arguing that they're the ones who lost this election for them in the Senate and in the House, And indeed, many of the regressives lost their campaigns for new House membership. So the number of Democrats again in the House of Representatives has shrunk. All this is manifesting right now in a discussion about Nancy Pelosi being Speaker of the House again. Remember, though, that we all hate Nancy Pelosi, right? We despise Nancy Pelosi. All of us despise Nancy Pelosi for decades. I mean, she is a leftist. She is a power luster. She is the one that said about Obamacare, we'll read it afterwards, after it passes. Who cares about whether this is who cares who cares about whether this is constitutional or not? What that's got to do with anything, right? That was their attitude. We despise Nancy Pelosi, but it turns out that the regressive left despises Nancy Pelosi too. She's too moderate. She's too centrist for them. She's too establishment for them. Democratic by name only. What would be the rhino for the Democratic Party? Dino. She's a dino. So they despise her. And this brings us to AOC. So AOC is, of course, if not the senior member of this wing of the Democratic Party, it's not clear who is. She is certainly the most charismatic and the one that gets the most TV hits. She's also, so she is kind of, to a large extent, the spokesman of the regressive left, right? They want to regress us back to a pre-American era. They want to regress us towards Europe, regress us towards the caveman. So AOC is kind of the spokesman for this. One of the interesting thing about Nancy Pelosi running for the leadership position as Speaker of the House is that nobody is running against her. The only person running against Nancy Pelosi right now is Kevin McCarthy, who's a Republican, with the idea that maybe they can split up the Democratic vote. Maybe some Democrats are so upset at Nancy Pelosi that they would actually vote for a Republican to be Speaker of the House. That's how ridiculous the situation is right now. Who is charismatic? I know you don't think she's charismatic. It doesn't matter what you think. You guys are not AOC's audience. It doesn't matter whether you think she's charismatic. What matters is whether the aggressive left thinks she's charismatic. And the answer to that is yes, objectively, they think she's charismatic. So, of course, she's not charismatic to us who know she's full of it. But to her base, within the Democratic Party, she is charismatic. Was Hitler charismatic? Was Hitler charismatic? I'm not comparing Hitler to AOC for those of you who might get upset. But was Hitler charismatic? Yes. He was charismatic. Was he a good guy? No, he was evil. But he was charismatic. I mean, my guess is Stalin was charismatic. FDR was certainly charismatic and a bad guy. I mean, sometimes I don't get you guys. You can't use your standard for who's charismatic. Who's charismatic is about what other people think of a person, not necessarily what you think of them. Do you think Hitler was charismatic for you? Would you have found Hitler's appealing? No. But he was charismatic. And she is charismatic. Whether you like her ideas or not. Whether you like her or not. It's just a fact. People are attracted to her. Now, and it's not going to help our cause to deny that. Yeah, Charlie Manson was charismatic. Okay. I don't think AOC is a Charlie Manson. I think that doesn't, again, these kind of comparisons don't help us. But yeah. Trump is charismatic. And I despise Trump. But he's charismatic. Would I follow him? No. Charlie Cook is charismatic. Would I follow Charlie? No. Oh, somebody's buying my book. Excellent. GOAT 707, the GOAT 707, the greatest of all time. 707 is buying my book. That's great. Greatest in what? I'm curious. All right, back to AOC. AOC is charismatic. She is a leader within the regressive Democratic movement. She is the future, potentially the future of the Democratic Party more generally. But Nancy Pelosi is running for Speaker of the House unopposed by other Democrats. There are no other Democrats that are willing to challenge Pelosi for the top job of Speaker of the House. And which is interesting. The regressives do not have enough power within the Democratic Party to have a candidate. Again, they actually took a beating, in a sense, during this last election. There is nobody who's more of a, quote, centrist, supposed centrist, who is willing to challenge Nancy Pelosi and split the vote there. There just isn't anybody within the Democratic Party willing to challenge right now Schumer in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi in the House. But that doesn't mean AOC doesn't believe they should be challenged. And it doesn't believe, the regressive left doesn't believe they should be challenged. The regressive left would love to see them out. The regressive left despises Nancy Pelosi and Schumer. And you don't have to believe me. I'm going to show you a clip now. See, tech, work for me. There we go. There's Nance. There she is, the charismatic AOC. Stephanie must be throwing up right now. And you can see for yourself that AOC is basically does not want Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House. All right, here it is. And by the way, this is the media outlet of the regressive left. The media outlet of the regressive left is the Young Turks, TYT, the Young Turks. And if you want to know what the regressive left is thinking, by the way, one of the Young Turks, Senex, I can't pronounce his name, ran for House membership. He ran in a district that was going to elect a Democrat, and he lost so badly. I mean, the thing about the regressive left is, and I think they act as if they are a majority within the Democratic Party. They act as if they're really popular. You, many of my listeners, act as if the regressive left is the Democratic Party and as if they're popular and as if they dictate everything. Republicans act as if these people are the Democratic Party. But the fact is that within the Democratic Party, the real regressives get very few votes. So I think Senex got like 5% of the votes. He was like 7th in the voting, and we're talking about a very, very, very well-known, media-savvy, media-popular, regressive leftist, and he was demolished by the centrist, members of the Democratic Party. I mean, he got nothing. So again, all right. Here we go. Whoops, it's muted. That won't help. Let me unmute her. Although, with you could argue with AOC being muted is an advantage, is a plus. But all right, we're trying to talk about ideas.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shared some pretty harsh realities regarding Democratic leadership during an interview with Jeremy Scahill for The Intercept. Let's take a quick look at her first statement.
Are you ready to say Pelosi and Schumer need to go?
I mean, I think so. I mean, and the question is, like this year, for example, the hesitancy that I have is that I want to make sure that if we're pointing people in a direction, that we have a plan. And my concern, and this I acknowledge as a failing, as something that we need to sort out, is that there isn't a plan. How do we fill that vacuum? Because if you create that vacuum, there are so many nefarious forces at play to fill that vacuum with something even worse.
So the Democratic Party is in civil war right now. So the progressives have basically said, we don't want Nancy Pelosi. They don't have a candidate. Why don't they have a candidate? Because surprise, surprise, shockingly, they've only had 2 years to plan for this. Shockingly, they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan. Yeah, I mean, it's true that people who work as bartenders rarely have plans, because you don't need a plan. It's about you show up to work, you do. I mean, but you'd think that somebody among these regressives would have a plan, but I guess they don't believe in plans. Plans are capitalist things, business things. So there's no plan on what to do to replace Pelosi and how to fill the vacuum created by the fact that if Pelosi's out, who do they have? They have nobody. But they consider Pelosi the devil. They really do. So there's a real clash within the Democratic Party right now about the future of the party. You know, the regressive left, which I think is a minority, is going to be very unhappy and is going to be yelling and shouting for a long time, and which will make for interesting politics. It's also interesting that you know, the American people are. I mean, it's just a fact that the American people, particularly when it comes to economic policy, when it comes to cultural policy, when it comes to the federal government, are centrist, not centrists. I mean, centrists in a bad way, but better than these regressives. They want big government, but they don't want it too big. They want government regulation, but they don't want too much government regulation. They want, you know, something to be done about inequality, but they don't want too much to be done about inequality. They worry about losing jobs. You saw that with Trump's success, but they don't want too harsh of a measures. They're really centrist. They're kind of stuck. They're neither here nor there. They're certainly not radical in either one of the directions. And the radicals on the far left, and then you've got the Trump. We'll talk about Trump in a minute. The Trump, the Trump on the Trumpists on the right. There is a center there that if somebody could grab, you might even be able to form a third party that got away from all this squabbling and could dominate American politics for a long time until people got sick of them. Because at the end of the day, the center cannot stand, right? Because the center is nothing. The center has no content. But for a while, in the short run, it can stand. But in the long run, it is empty. So it's not sustainable. But in the short run, I think the center could win and actually dominate politics for a while. But I don't see anybody with the courage. That's the problem of being a centrist. They have no courage to do anything dramatic about it. So I see a lot of infighting. I mean, AOC and others have already attacked Biden for choosing what they consider centrist for the cabinet. Elizabeth Warren didn't get a role. Bernie Sanders hasn't gotten a role. And younger, more aggressive, more ambitious, whether it's climate change or other things, have not gotten roles. And it really is the old guard. I mean, they put John Kerry, who's almost or maybe older than Biden, in charge of climate change czar. I mean, the guy is, again, no passion, no energy. It's not going to go anywhere, and I think that's Biden's purpose. He doesn't want it to go anywhere. He knows it's unpopular, and it's a losing strategy. Pete Buttigieg got a role, but Pete is not a regressive, right? The regressives didn't like Pete. Pete was the enemy. Pete was considered a centrist sellout. So, yeah, I mean, there's a few people here and there within the Biden. I mean, he had to throw them a few bones that are a little left, right? There's the guy from Wall Street, BlackRock, who's an environmentalist who he's brought in. There's a few others, but they're not powerhouses, not progressive, regressive, powerhouses. So this administration will govern from the center to the extent that it can. And of course, Republicans, hopefully, it looks like Republicans will pick up at least one of the Georgia seats. I'm still hoping for both of them. The latest polls show Republicans ahead. And, so if Republicans could get their act even semi together, they should win Georgia. Republicans will have control of 52 seats in the Senate. Biden won't be able to get anything radical across. What he'll be able to get is stuff that Republicans agree on, which is scary enough. When Democrats and Republicans agree on. You can see that in the stimulus package that is still coming out, where the discussion is not principled or fundamental. It's all about power. It's all about power. And you can see it in the budgets and everything else. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting 4 years of divided government with, I hope, lots of gridlock. Lots of gridlock, in my view, the best combination. The issue is Laufey is such a dummy. Yeah, she's the senator who's running for the Senate in Georgia. Yeah, I mean, they're all dummies. It's not an issue of being dumb. It's that she's got an R in front of her name, and therefore it will throttle the Biden's initiatives. So even though he's not a regressive, he'll throw them some bones, and those will be throttled by. And he'll have an excuse. Couldn't get it past the Senate. Sorry, guys. I tried. I really wanted to live up to your regressive ideas, but I couldn't get it past the Senate. The Republicans stopped me. All right. So the Democrats are trying to hold it together, but they're really divided. Really divided. I think the establishment centrist wing of the Democratic Party is by far the majority. And many of them come from Republican states, so they know they would lose their majority in the House like that if they went too far to the left. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost the majority in the House in 2022 anyway. So the House is not going wacky left anytime soon. And the Senate is not going, I mean, you just don't have enough senators. You got Bernie, you got Elizabeth Warren, you've got maybe 5-6 others. You know, the Democratic Party is basically left of center, which is bad enough because the center is already so far to the left. And then your left of center, that's way to the left of where I would like it to be. But not where I would like it to be. Where I wish, even within the context of the world today, it would be. All right, let's turn to Republicans. What a mess. But what's interesting about the Republican Party is, and not just the party itself, but you can see this in the commentary online and everything, is exactly what I told you would happen is happening. I mean, first of all, there's already a civil war breaking out, and it's not between the never Trumpers and the for Trumpers. The civil war that's breaking out right now is, you know, among the people who support Trump. But the civil war right now is how loyal are you to Trump? It's all about loyalty to Trump. And what's stunning and so disappointing, and I mean, what do you, I don't know what you even say about this. It's so horrific. But what is truly horrific about this is that the loyalty test is, are you willing to subvert the law? Are you willing to subvert the will of the voters or not? In the name of loyalty to Trump, not in the name of anything else. And it's stunning to see that it really has boiled down to, we don't need evidence, we don't need facts, we don't even trust the court system anymore because they ruled against us. The only issue is, am I loyal or not loyal to Donald Trump? And if I'm loyal to Donald Trump, then this election is a fraud, and I will fight for it as a fraud. I mean, Ted Cruz saying he will argue the case in front of the Supreme Court when he knows it's never going to get to the Supreme Court, so there's nothing to argue. It's just virtue signaling to the base. But the base only cares about your statement about your loyalty to Trump or not. So the civil war right now is between the chairman of the Republican Party in Georgia and the governor and secretary of state, the chairman of the Republican Party in Arizona and the governor of Arizona, the governor of Georgia, the secretary of state of Georgia, all supported Trump, all, as far as I know, contributed money to Trump's campaign, all of them were on the campaign trail supporting Trump. But now, because they've certified a legal election for Trump, they're the villains. They're not loyal enough. They're not willing to endorse conspiracy theories in order to keep Trump in office for another 4 years. They're not willing to subvert the American way. They're not willing to subvert the principles of the Constitution and the principles of America. They're not willing to subvert that in order to keep Donald Trump in power. I mean, a big chunk of the Republican Party and a big chunk of its supporters online have become just Trump loyalists, just Trump worshippers. I mean, okay, we tried everything. You've gone to the courts. You've had, I think, at least 60 rulings against you. In Georgia, they've counted the vote 3 times. One recount by hand. So Dominion couldn't have done anything because they counted the ballots by hand, every single one of them. So even if Dominion switched the votes in Georgia, they counted the paper ballots. Now there's a question about the signatures. So they're doing another verification of the signatures in one county in Georgia. We all know how this is going to come out. It's going to come out that it's fine. Ann Coulter is glad Trump lost? That's surprising to me. I thought she was a huge supporter of Trump's. Although she thought he kind of was weak on immigration. Well, she's out there. So what's going to happen in the Republican Party is really interesting. How far are Republican senators and congressmen willing to go on January 5th to show loyalty to Trump? Will they question the Electoral College? Will they challenge the vote? How long will they challenge it for? Will they challenge it once, kind of to show their credentials as Trump loyalists? Or will they challenge it all the way? How far are these state Republican parties going to go in challenging the governors? Governors who, again, were pro-Trump. In states where if the Republicans don't hold together, they could lose the governorship. Right now, they dominate. They hold the governorship in Arizona and Georgia, in spite of the fact that both states voted Biden. But if they start fighting, they start breaking up, what happens then? And then, of course, this is still a battle among the Trump loyalists in a sense of how loyal are you to Trump? How far are you willing to go in your loyalty to Trump? What about the battle between the people who were never enamored with Trump, maybe supported him but never liked him? Or the ones that don't like Trump, the Ben Sassers, the Haleys of the world? When do they enter the fray? And when they enter the fray, how's that going to all play out? I mean, I can see at least 3-4 factions within the Republican Party. How many of the never Trumpers are going to come back to the Republican Party? And when they come back, what's going to be the reception? And how are they going to deal with it? The Republican Party is in for 4 years of brutal infighting. That's going to be egged on by multiple media channels. That's going to be egged on by Trump himself. Somebody says John Bolton. Yeah, where does John Bolton fit into the new Republican Party? Or the neocons, not Irving Kristol, his son, Bill Kristol, who was a never-Trumper. Where do these people belong? Do they belong? Can they be brought back into the Republican Party, or does the Republican Party not want them? And how does this play out intellectually? Where does the Republican Party land up? So it's going to be a very interesting 4 years. It's going to be very interesting to watch what happens and where they go. Some of them are never Republicans. Some of them are gone from the Republican Party. I read a story today of some of the never Republicans are gone. Never Trumpers are gone. They've joined the Democratic Party. They're trying to move the Democratic Party to the center. They're trying to establish. Some of them want to establish a third party, but some of them want to go back to the Republican Party. And we'll see what happens. Yes, the American Capitalist Party. We can hope. We can hope one day. So definitely civil war in the Republican Party, and it's major, and it's going to last a long time. And the same thing is going to happen in the Democratic Party. Both political parties are fragmented. There's going to be a lot of infighting. There's still not a leader for the progressives. I mean, AOC, she herself admits in that interview, she admits that she's too inexperienced and young to be competing for a leadership position. All right, quick reminders. We've got over 130 people watching right now on YouTube, and we've only got, 59 likes. So if you like the show, don't do it if you don't, but if you like the show, please press the like button. Really appreciate that. That would be great. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you're not a subscriber, to share the show if, with your friends. That's a great way to expand the show. And of course, don't forget to support the show. This is the end of the year. It would be nice to see an uptick in support for the show as we go into next year, so I can project where we're going to be next year. We're still planning to build build a proper studio for the show next year. Unfortunately, the condo that I was planning to buy in Puerto Rico, that transaction fell through. So I'm now bidding on got an offer in on another condo, hoping to get that one. But whatever condo we get, I'm going to turn one room into basically a studio, soundproof the room, also create some nice background, whether it's a green screen or just a nice background, professional looking background. We'll figure all that out in the months to come. And I'm hoping that you guys will add your support to the show, show your support to the show, value for value. Hopefully you get value from me. Show that you do by writing a check, or in this case, PayPal, YaronBrookShow.com/support. And of course, Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals are all ways in which you can show support. You can get on there at $2 a month, or some people at $500 a month, and anywhere in between is great. Anywhere in between is great. Also, another way to show support and ask questions is right here on Super Chat. So we don't have a lot of Super Chat questions today, which is surprising. Got quite a few people on, but very few Super Chat questions. So don't forget to use the feature on YouTube to ask questions. There's a lot of you on YouTube, so use it. And of course, the higher the dollar denomination of the question, the earlier I will answer that question. So, all right. Anyway, so are we able to attend the talk at NYU scheduled for next year? NYC needs objectivism. Thanks again for all you do. Looking forward to another year. Unfortunately, no, it's going to be a class. So it's not going to be a public lecture. It'll just be a class. And plus, right now it's scheduled for middle of March. And with social distancing, let's see if it even happens. But I don't think, for a variety of reasons, I don't think it'll be open to the public. I'm hoping we can tape it. Because it should be interesting, particularly given the composition of the class and the students. Noel, thank you. Really appreciate that. Thanks for the support. All right, let's shift topics. Last week, a bunch of stories hit the press that I saw about the fact that COVID, there's going to be a baby bust. It turns out that people are not having babies during COVID. They're not getting pregnant. right? So yes, 2020 birth rates are going to be about normal, right? But 2021, the expectation is, we'll see if this pans out. The expectation is that there are going to be 500,000 fewer babies born in America, in America in 2020. In 2021, 500,000 fewer babies than in a normal year. Now, birth rates in the United States have been declining anyway, as they have in much of the West. But COVID has caused them to decline significantly. And it's interesting to discuss the reasons for that. And I think there are basically two. One, I'd say, is the conventional reason that people give. And I think there's truth to it, but I think it's emphasized. And then I'd like to give you my reason. And I think it's not just applicable, the reasoning is not just applicable to COVID, but it is also applicable to why birth rates generally are dropping in the West. Why is Italy, for example, one of the, shrinking fast? Europe generally shrinking, Russia shrinking. China, we know, is shrinking, and we know why. One-child policy. So there it's, but of course, even with the relaxation of one-child policy, Chinese seem to be only having one child. But Japan, shrinking significantly. So why is this? Well, there's clearly a correlation between this and economic uncertainty in wealthy countries and low economic growth. So what's interesting is that when you go from poverty to wealth, there is a dramatic decrease in the number of children, right? But that seems to stabilize at some point at replacement cost, replacement number or above. What's replacement? Something like 2.2 kids, right? You have to replace you, and then you have to contribute to the fact to replacing some people don't have kids. So it has to be a little over 2, right? So 2.2. And then what happens is that in most really, wealthy countries, over the last 20, 30 years, birth rates have gone down again further. And the question is why? Why are people having so many few? We know why when we go from poverty to wealth, there's a decline. Basically, your children are going to live. You can save money for retirement. You're not depending on your children to take care of you when you're old. So you don't need as many children, right? And you're not sending the kids to work. So they're not bringing in revenue. So they're a cost. They're a cost that doesn't fund themselves. And therefore, you have fewer kids. It's also true that women are working. That would reduce the number of kids. It's also true that that people become more selfish. They become more self-interested. They are much more engaged in, now that they're not struggling every hour of every day to survive as they did when they were poor. Now they have leisure time. They have opportunity to enjoy life. Well, fewer kids gives you more time to enjoy life. Not that kids are not enjoyable, but beyond the kids. Right? So there are a lot of reasons why there's this drop. Now, many people argue that the problem right now is that kids, you can't afford them. So the reason we're dropping from 2.2 to 1.8 to in some countries 1.1 or 1.2, I think in Japan it's just above 1, where the population are dramatically shrinking, is one argument is it's an economic cost. It's just too expensive. And I don't really buy that. I mean, this has to do, there's some truth to it. That if you want to maintain a certain lifestyle, if you want to maintain a certain level of, live in particular places, do particular things, and yes, certain things are quite expensive, like education in America, but in Europe, education is not expensive. Healthcare in America, but healthcare is not expensive in Europe. So part of it is that it's hard to afford, I guess. But I'm not sure I buy it. I mean, I read an article today about the hollowing out of the middle class. And the middle class is being hollowed out. Why? Because even though people are making more money than they ever did, like it was describing this one family that makes $160,000, They can't buy. They don't save any money. This family making $160,000 a year was saving $125 a month and had $400 in their saving accounts. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's a reason for that. Oh, and they were massively in debt. And there's a reason for that. It's because people are living beyond their means. It's not that they can't afford to live. It's not that you can't afford to have kids. It's you choose to spend money on other things. You choose not to save. You choose to take on debt and consume. You choose to consume rather than to save. And that's a choice people are making. And I would argue that a lot of those choices have to do with your values. A lot of those choices have to do with the second-handed society in which you're trying to catch up with the neighbors. You're trying to catch up with the Joneses. You're not really pursuing your self-interest. You're not thinking long-term. And a lot of these choices have to do with government that encourages us to consume, government that does not, that indeed penalizes earning income and saving money. But the reason we can afford more is because we make choices. In our hierarchy of value, we place things above kids. So part of it is, I think, true economics, but I think the economics to a large extent are driven by values, changes in values. But there is some economic issues, right? Economic growth is low. It has been low in the West for the last 20, 30 years. The economy just is not growing fast. Didn't grow fast under Obama, Trump, Bush. Last spurt of economic growth was during Clinton. So the economy is not growing fast. Job security is gone. So the old days of you got a job and you worked there 40 years, that's gone. Doesn't exist anymore in most advanced economies. If you look at Japan, Japan has had almost no economic growth since the early 90s. But Japan has job security. And yet, births have plummeted in Japan. So I think something more is going on than just economic uncertainty and we can't afford it, right? And low economic growth. And if you look at COVID, what people are saying is the reason people are not having kids because of COVID. Luca's asking about Israel, and I promise I'm going to get to Israel in a minute. That's part of my explanation is going to be to explain Israel's high rate of children, because Israel has a very high rate of children, even among the secular people. And I mean, you can understand the religious, but even among secular Israelis, Israel has a very high birth rate, higher than I think any other Western country. And I'll try to explain that in a minute. Where was I? I was about COVID. So the explanation given for the COVID is, again, economic insecurity. People have lost their jobs. People uncertain about the future. Economically. They don't know how much money they'll have. They don't know if they can afford kids. So they're not having kids. They're not planning to have kids. So, and that's all true. And I think all of that is a factor, but I think there's something more going on, which has more to do with the values. It has more to do with people's attitude towards the future, and it has more to do with people's attitudes about their own lives. I think that a lot of not having kids has to do with people's attitudes about the future. I think Europe has turned pessimistic probably 20, 30, 40 years ago. Pessimistic about the future. Whether it's climate change, whether it's just the economy, whether it's immigrants, Muslims, whatever. because I think those are all fill-ins for a deep kind of, lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem as a culture in terms of what the future will bring. And I think when you have that, then you're looking for the crises, you're looking for the problems, you're looking for the things that are going to go horribly wrong. Right? So even though Europe is wealthy and Europeans are relatively wealthy, certainly by global standards they're wealthy, they don't believe in themselves and they don't believe in the future. They don't believe in their ability to be successful in the future. Not just economically, but culturally. It has to do with, again, values, and it has to do with kind of the sense of life. The sense of life of Europeans broadly, again, many exceptions. Everybody on the call from Europe right now is an exception. But they have a relatively dark sense of life. Things are going to get worse, they're not going to get better. Things are going to get dark, they're not going to get good. The world is going to freeze over, boil over, whatever the latest climate change prognosis is. So why have kids? Things suck. And when it comes to their own lives, they've internalized altruism. We talk a lot about altruism because it's so important. They internalize altruism. But they don't want to live altruistic lives. They believe in altruism as a noble ideal, but just like everybody else, they don't want to live that noble ideal. So what is the alternative? What's the alternative to altruism in your day-to-day life? Well, it's much more hedonistic. So Europeans don't tend to focus as much on career as Americans do. They don't tend to focus on the future as much as Americans do. They're not ambitious like many Americans are. They don't have this gung-ho sense of life that Americans do. And maybe, and Luca will have to enlighten me, but maybe this also explains the difference between the Swiss and the Italians. Because I think the Swiss, because it's a freer country, because it's got less of that dark history associated with it, I think it's a more positive country. The people are more positive. The people are more future-oriented. The people are more ambitious for themselves. So it's less hedonistic and more thoughtful, values-driven about the future. Whereas Italy, France, Germany, Netherlands are much darker places in terms of the mentality. And also places where this deep-rooted pessimism, and therefore, when you're pessimistic about the future, when you believe in altruism, but you don't want to be that, you don't want to be it, so you've accepted guilt. You've accepted guilt as part of life. Then hedonism is your avenue out. It's the way to get some pleasure, at least. It's a way to enjoy yourself, at least at some level. It really is an escape. Right. Yeah, Luca affirms what I said about Switzerland. One of the reasons he says he moved from Italy, he's originally Italian, to Switzerland. So it's the hedonism, it's the darkness, it's the sense of life that I think in Europe is causing this decline in birth rate. And I think to some extent that is true in Japan. I think with the collapse of the Japanese bubble in the early 1990s, I think there was this massive sense of optimism that Japan was going to take over the world, basically. In a sense, the attitude we have today towards China. And they could do nothing wrong. And then it all just went away. It just disappeared. And standard of living's dropped, and people never went back to what it was in the late 1980s. And economic growth has been static for 30, 40 years. And Japan has this attitude. The Japan government inculcates this attitude. Same attitude, by the way, the European governments inculcate, and that the American government is becoming this way. We'll take care of you. Don't worry. We've got you. We're going to have your back. We're going to take care of you in retirement. We're going to take care of your savings. We're going to take care of you. No matter what happens, we're going to take care of you. So that attitude dulls the mind. It dulls, again, that sense of values. And people become dark and pessimistic and not that interested in living. Not interested in planning for a future. Even though the Japanese live longer than anybody else. They're not engaged in planning, in believing in a future, in wanting a future. There's a fatalism and a passivity. Now, maybe things will change in Japan, hard to tell. There is definitely a younger, more entrepreneurial, more individualistic generation in Japan. But collectivism, it's not about your personal values. And again, and you reject collectivism, but what do you replace it with? So maybe the younger generation in Japan is replacing it again, like Europeans, with hedonism. But there's no alternative to the altruism and collectivism. There's no philosophy out there other than objectivism that presents an alternative. And the Enlightenment is dead in Europe. So what is the alternative if you're giving up on altruism? If you're giving up on collectivism? And you know the dangers of collectivism because Europeans certainly know this. Where do you go? So it's I think the decline in birth rates, and I think this is true of the United States now as well. The bigger government is, the more intrusive, the more it pretends to be your mother and father and to tell you how to live and what to do. The more fear-mongering there is, the more disaster there is, the more dark we get. And I think COVID, if anything, more than the economic issues, has just brought this darkness around. Not only are people afraid of the virus, but people have realized that their leadership, intellectual and political, are thoroughly incompetent. Thoroughly incompetent. That's what COVID has demonstrated. The complete and utter incompetence of our government. And yet, our government is telling us they're going to manage our lives. Is kind of a cognitive dissonance that people can't handle, and what it turns into is darkness. What it turns into is pessimism. What it turns into is passivity. What it turns into is hedonism rather than value orientation. And people like that don't have kids. Don't have kids. When you don't know about the future, when you're pessimistic about the future, when you're pessimistic about your life, when you have no real values, when you don't plan long term, when you're completely relying on other forces, and when you think the world around you is falling apart, which I think many people do post-COVID, it drains the pessimism out. It drains the energy out of wanting to have kids. Now, why does Israel have more kids? And I don't know what the situation is with COVID in Israel. Probably the same as in the US in terms of a decline. But at least up until COVID, Israel was having... Because Israeli society has gone through this amazing transformation over the last 30 years. Maybe even 40 years. Israeli population become more individualistic. It's become more career-oriented. It's become more ambitious. And it's become more positive, in a sense of positive about a future. I mean, I grew up in a period where there was a serious concern among Israelis that Israel would be wiped out by an external enemy, that Israel would be defeated in the battlefield. And it almost was in 1973. I don't think Israelis feel that way anymore. Israelis are confident that they have won, that they will win. The exact shape of the resolution of everything with the Palestinians is unclear, but what is clear is Israel's not going to go away. When I grew up, Israel was a relatively poor country, a developing country. Today, it's considered one of the developed world. It is richer. And it's richer because of its high-tech industry. It's richer because of its incredible productivity. It's richer because of the human mind and innovation and entrepreneurship. And to some extent, they know this. It's fresh enough that they sense it. And that has translated into this optimism and to this, they want to be successful. They think about the future and now they believe that they will survive. Whereas past generations did not necessarily. The experiment is working. So I think that's why secular Jews in Israel are having more kids. I think they're more optimistic. I think they're more values-oriented than many people in the West. I think it's to some extent, a healthier culture. It's, to some extent, a culture that is more values-oriented and has discovered individualism later, because it used to be very collectivist, and still is, to a large extent, but has moved towards more individualism. And as part of that, has that values orientation, that positivity about the future, that positive sense of life, I think is why there are more kids. All right, we've got almost 160 people watching live right now, only about 88 likes, so that should be well over 100. So I really would appreciate it before you leave. Click that like. Actually, just do it now so you don't have to forget. You don't forget later on. Just press the like if you like the show. Anyway, that is my theory, and I think COVID has made all those negatives worse, right? Lucas says many European countries are lower than 1.5. Switzerland is 1.5. That's well below replacement. Many other European countries are way below that. It's one of the reasons so many Europeans are pro-immigration, because they realize that if they want to get any retirement benefits from the government, you better have some taxpayers. It's not going to be your locals who are going to pay the taxes. You better get some taxpayers brought in from outside to be able to afford all the promises that the welfare state has made. Yeah, it's truly shocking, but somebody says, is Israel abusing human rights of Palestinians, or is it mostly a lie? You should use the super chat to ask questions like that, really. $2. But no, I think that, are there cases in which Israel abuses the individual? Human rights is probably an anti-concept, but individual rights of Palestinians, are there cases in which that happens? Yes. Is that the dominant feature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? No. The dominant feature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the unwillingness of the Palestinians to recognize Israel, to recognize it as a state, to recognize that these people are going to be living there and thriving there, and the Palestinian unwillingness to live in peace with them. The day the Palestinians want to live in peace with the Israelis, peace will happen. Peace will happen. This is all a question of the will of the Palestinians. So, no, I don't think Israel, as a policy, the problem is that they're abusing the individual rights of Palestinians, although it does happen on occasion. I don't know if Super Chat has a character limit, but you can always split the question into two parts and split the money into two or something like that if you have a long question. All right, let's... Morocco is just normalized, but Israelis have been visiting Morocco for a long time now. Morocco has had, without having embassies and stuff, has had fairly normal relations with Israel for a long time. My in-laws, visited Morocco 10, 15 years ago. So Morocco and Israel has had a good, positive, productive relationship for quite a while. What's happened recently is just that has been formalized. But it's been there for a long time. All right. Ian says, Iran's never sent a super chat. That's true. I've never sent a super chat. Only received them. All right. Let's see. I want to talk about this uplifting story. This is a great story. I don't know if you guys followed this a few weeks ago. But so here's a story of what happened. The CEO of a company called Innovex Downhole Solutions. Downhole means down the hole, so it's oil and gas. So it's an oil and gas company. His name is Adam Anderson. Adam Anderson wanted to buy his employees a Christmas gift. So what he did was he contacted North Face, and asked to get I guess, some jackets, North Face jackets. You know, North Face apparel, it's everywhere, right? Particularly in for snowing and stuff like that. He wanted to get North Face apparel. And he wanted, on the North Face apparel, he wanted the company logo, which is like not for distribution out there, just for the employees as a gift. It turns out that he made this request in the past before of North Face and had distributed apparel with the company logo on it. Anyway, he ordered 400 jackets from them. And then he heard back that his request had been rejected by North Face. Why? Well, because they had decided that it would be inconsistent with their ESG policy, environmental, social, government policy, to have their logo, the North Face logo, associated with an oil and gas company, because oil and gas companies, as we know, are evil companies. Bad for the planet, destructive. Now, this happens. And you know what? This is going to happen more. But what usually happens is the CEO of a company like this says, okay, fine, I'll go find another company. And in this case, they did. I forget the name of the company, but they did find another company that produced the 400 jackets. But what is amazing about this is that Adam Anderson, the CEO, actually wrote a letter to North Face and made it an open letter, a letter that was published about this, where he challenged them. He challenged them, not only about the way they were doing business, but about, if you will, the morality of fossil fuels. One of the funny things about the challenge was that he pointed out to North Face that the jackets had polyester in them, and that polyester was made of, drumroll, fossil fuels. North Face indeed would not have a business without fossil fuels. Their clothes have fossil fuels in them. They wouldn't have a business without fossil fuels because people couldn't come to their ski resorts that need their clothes without fossil fuel. I mean, you could go on and on and on. There's no civilization without fossil fuels. But what is amazing is here's a CEO who stood up and made the argument and made it public. And on Twitter, there was a Twitter storm about this, the pro and the anti and the whole conversation, which is brilliant. This is exactly what we want. We want the conversation. Indeed, I believe that if we had more Adam Andersons, if we had more CEOs willing to take a stand like this, we would win. I think we'd win easily. But what's really even better than that, even better than that, right, is that Anderson attributes his views about fossil fuels to our own, if I can call him our own, Alex Epstein. He attributes it, he says explicitly, he was inspired by Alex's book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel. Now, I think this is amazing, and this is part of the way in which you change a culture. Is Adam Anderson an objectivist? Probably not. Will he ever be an objectivist? Probably not. But he was influenced by a particular idea within objectivism. And he is influenced in a way because of the way Alex presents these ideas, in a way that conveys important ideas about the world. The role of energy, the role of cheap energy, the importance and the standard. Remember what the standard is. The standard is human life, not human suffering, not nature, not the environment, not spotted owls, not the ice cap, whatever. The standard is human life. And Adam Anderson has internalized that and has made that part of him, part of his views. And then has the courage, I think because of the moral certainty that he has received from Alex, to post a public letter explicitly advocating for these ideas. Right? And this has gotten a lot of publicity. I mean, he said, I mean, in this letter, he says, for example, without oil and gas, there would be no market for, nor the ability to create the products your company sells, he's telling North Face. That's amazing. He writes, low-cost, reliable energy is critical to enable humans to flourish. I mean, that's straight out of Alex. So this kind of points us in the direction of how we're going to change the world. What we need are dozens of Alexes. We need an Alex in every major field. We need intellectuals making the case, influencing business leaders, and I think business leaders are going to be the key in the future. And we need to embolden business leaders, give them the intellectual ammunition, and then embolden them to speak up. Because when a CEO like Anderson speaks up, it has much more impact than even if Alex speaks. The Financial Times even commented and reported on the letter. Right? And even if they're critical of him, it creates a buzz. It creates interest. People say, where did Adam get these ideas? Oh, there's this book. Wow, that's a weird title. The Marquis for Fossil Fuels. So you can see how this will grow and grow and grow. What we need is more objectivist intellectuals doing more work, independent or as part of institutes, or part of the Einstein Institute or not. The Institute has played no small role in getting Alex to where he is today, in my view. But this is how it grows. We need more and more and more people talking about these ideas, impacting decision makers, impacting people who have platforms, like Adam Anderson. So a lot of people are now questioning this ESG and the way it's going to be implemented. It's going to be, this is great. I mean, this is one of the best stories I've read in a long time. And I'm excited. I'm excited for Alex. I'm excited for all of us that this is possible. All right, that this is happening and we can see the influence. Hopefully, we'll see a lot more of this in the months, years, decades to come. Okay, we'll shift now to Super Chat questions. Of course, please, yeah, you can use the Super Chat. We're kind of low on dollars today, so feel free to engage and to write big checks. But we'll be doing that through the Super Chat. You can support the show without asking a question. You can support the show with asking a question, and I will answer those questions. All right. Let's see. California setup is looking great. Thanks for the great work you're doing and the value you provide. My pleasure. Hopefully, I'll inspire more Andersons to speak up. Everything we use when creating our lives on planet comes from the planet. So pollutants are byproduct from Earth, from, quote, Earth affected by efficacious man. Yeah, I mean, everything around us is, I mean, we're not bringing atoms or molecules from outside of Earth. So we're all part of it. But the problem with environmentalists is they view human beings as outside of nature. They view human beings, like the religionists, as not part of nature. Because if you view human beings as part of nature, and let's say the way human beings survive, just like every species has a way in which it survives, and nobody accuses the lion of eating, whatever, of hunting and killing certain animals. Well, human beings survive by certain means. It turns out that means involves changing nature. If human beings are just part of nature, then changing it is part of our nature. Why would anybody object to that? But you see, they, like the religionists, view human beings as outside of nature. Nature was this pristine, beautiful, amazing thing, and then human beings were plopped onto it. strangers in a strange land. And they're doing damage. They're doing bad things to this precious, beautiful nature. But it's all part of, we are part of the natural world. And our nature requires us to change that world. It requires us to pollute. It requires us to use the resources. It requires us to level mountains. It requires us to chop down trees. It requires us to change the world around us, to make it habitable for us. That's, evolution has given us a capacity to reason. That's what we do. All right. Your recent detractors have now backed off. They have? I haven't noticed that. Good. How were you able to stay so confident you'd weather this when many of us were concerned for you and AOI? Well, I don't know that it's over. First, we'll see. We'll see. Why am I confident? One, because I'm confident in the truth. Two, I'm confident in my ability and the ability of those of AOI to do the work, and I'm confident in you guys that you can see the work. I mean, I think AOI will announce later that it's financially, AOI has never been in a better financial position than it is right now, and it's doing good work. I think it's communicating better than ever about that work and how good it is, about the impact it's having. Given that I'm confident in the work that we do and confident, I just think that at the end of the day, values do get rewarded. That good work does get rewarded. Now, again, we'll see what the future holds, but I think you have to stand your ground when you know you're right, when the truth is on your side. You have to stand your ground, hold your ground. And when you know you're right, live up to that. I mean, it's not just these detractors. Think about, since I started this show, I have been under attack nonstop. But it's not new. Since I took the job at the Institute, I've been under attack nonstop. The only difference is that with the show and with social media, you notice that the unhappy people, right? In the 2000s, when people that were unhappy with me, I didn't know. Maybe they'd stop contributing to the Institute. Maybe they'd yell at me once in a while. But generally, I wouldn't know. But in the last 10 years with social media, you know when people are unhappy with you. And the fact is, there's a lot of people out there who really dislike me. Now, there are a lot of people who like me. Look at my channel's still growing. The viewership is still high. And a lot of you have stuck through some of these chats that have been quite difficult, and survived and are still supportive of me. And thank you. And the support I get from you financially is very rewarding and very positive. For me to do this, for me to continue this on a big, as seriously as I'd like to, we need about double where we are today, but we'll get there. We're going to grow. We're going to grow that support. We're going to increase the financial support over time. But I'm used to being attacked. I was attacked brutally in the 2000s over my position over Bush. And then, of course, when we started the podcast was just when the whole Trump phenomena started in 2015. You know exactly what's been happening with people attacking me over the Trump phenomena. And that's just morphed, and it's gotten worse because even people who were skeptical about Trump in 2016 became very, very, strong Trump supporters by the time of this election. And we've weathered that. We'll survive this election. We'll go into next year stronger than we'll ever been. The show will be stronger than we'll ever been. The Institute is stronger than it's ever been. And we will thrive. And that's the goal. I just can't wait for 2020 to be over. I haven't liked this year at all. A lot of bad stuff has happened this year. So I'm eager to get on with life beyond. So it's, what is it now? Today's the 19th, so we've got 12 days left. Can't wait for that New Year's Eve and to get this over with. All right. I'm reading How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley. Do you know of any work done on innovation from an objectivist perspective, perhaps not just on political level, but delving into perspectives from the other branches? No, not really. Not beyond what Ayn Rand talks about in Atlas Shrugged and in the Fountainhead about the process of creativity, of innovation, of bringing products to market. You see that in Reardon more than anybody else. But, my new project, and I'll be working on this with Don Watkins, and we're not quite ready to announce it, but we will be announcing it sometime in 2021, will have a lot to do with this. So we'll have a lot to do with innovation, the causes of innovation. It won't quite be, because I'm trying to broaden the audience with this project, so it won't be as explicitly objectivist and philosophical. It will be philosophical, but not as explicitly objectivist. But I will be trying to work out and promote and discuss and bring out there if you will, a theory of innovation, more than just a theory of innovation. A theory of innovation, economic growth, ingenuity. What does it take to get the kind of exponential growth we are seeing in some industries today and in some companies today? So it's going to be a topic that starts with individual to how to organize a company for exponential growth, and then how does an economy, and on a global level, how do you generate exponential growth? So it's going to be, I think it's going to be fascinating. I'm going to learn a lot from it. I'm reading a lot of new things right now, but it's going to be focused on innovation, on growth, and on particularly one of the really interesting questions is, what happened in the 21st century? What's happened over the last 20 years? Because I think something dramatic has happened in the last 20 years with the creation of big tech, with the technological changes that have happened in tech, that have, think about the wealth that Apple has created. Think about the wealth. And I know some of you are going to say, oh, it's just the Fed. No, there's something more than just the Fed. There's real wealth. There's real change. I mean, look at the fact that what we're doing right now, and look at how well the global economy is done with COVID, in spite of lockdowns, in spite of shutdowns, in spite of closing down businesses. We've survived it quite well because of technology. And something changed. Something changed, I think. And it's going to be interesting to talk about that. So it's related to that discussion. I would also recommend the work of Jason Crawford. Is doing some work on economic growth and related somewhat to innovation. Jason Crawford, you can look his work up as well. Can you comment on the phenomena of corrupting vaccination through government purchase? In Europe, mandatory vaccination will be implemented. Also, it has become a reason to increase lockdown policy, apply PCR test abuse, and so on. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this. I think the idea that government is purchasing vaccines is an abomination. I think it's really, really bad. I think as a consequence, vaccines are going to be distributed ineffectively, inefficiently. You're already seeing supply chain breakdowns with the vaccines where some people are getting their first dose, but the second dose is uncertain. You have to get that second dose within a particular window. Instead of letting Amazon, UPS, FedEx, CVS, and Walmart working with Pfizer and Moderna do this, we've got the states organizing the distribution of these vaccines together with the federal government. We've got maybe generals involved. Why not let the infrastructure, Walmart, why not let Walmart and Amazon and CVS and Walgreens distribute the vaccines? Not based on government decree, but just based on a profit motive. Why not allow the whole distribution of vaccines to be based on profit? You'd get much more effective, much faster, much more productive vaccination. Of course, we could have started this 6 months ago. So I did a whole show on free market vaccinations. So I encourage you to do that. Now, of course, once the government owns the vaccine, what does it look for? It looks for power. And yeah, mandatory vaccination is one way to do that. And everything else, the whole COVID thing has been a opportunity for massive increases in government power, government control, government interference. And the sad things is, none of it is anybody challenged, is anybody opposed, is anybody questioned. Lucas says, here in Switzerland, vaccines will be free of charge. They're free of charge everywhere. They're free of charge in the United States. And the first doses would be administered next week. First doses have already been administered here. But there's already breakdowns in the infrastructure because it's all done by the state. I don't know how it's done in Switzerland. Switzerland has, of course, a very healthy pharmaceutical industry, but it's the only country outside of the United States that has a robust pharmaceutical industry. The UK, a little bit. But those three countries dominate pharmaceutical industry in the world. Switzerland, the US, and the UK. In spite of the fact that the vaccine that we're all talking about was developed in Germany. All right, if life is the standard, wouldn't environmentalists just say that saving the ice caps is holding life as the standard, since melting ice caps threatens human life on a grand scale? If they said that, then that would be an interesting discussion. Then we could debate it. Then at least we've set the standard for what the standard is, human flourishing. Right? It's not just human life, it's human flourishing. And now we can debate which policy is more consistent with human flourishing. And, the whole melting ice caps is a massive exaggeration in terms of its threat to human life on a grand scale. I mean, there's almost no evidence that it is a threat. I mean, think about all the places that were supposed to have flooded by now. And haven't. The islands that were supposed to be underwater. It's just not happening. And so the massive threat is more propaganda than anything else. But once you accept the standard, then you can have a conversation. The problem is that the environmentalists don't really accept that standard. And if they accepted that standard, then the argument we would make is fundamentally philosophically. Human flourishing requires more than anything else freedom. Freedom to make decisions. Freedom to decide. Freedom to live and to live a flourishing life. And what does a flourishing life requires? Well, one of the things that a flourishing life requires more than anything else is energy. Because if we're going to build dikes against the flooding, or if we're going to have to move inland away from the coast because of the flooding, we're going to need energy. And even if we don't have to move anywhere, we're going to move energy. The one thing we know we need above all else from a material perspective is energy in order to survive. So with all due respect to melting ice caps, we'll have to deal with that. But the one thing we cannot give up, the one thing we cannot sacrifice, the one thing we cannot abandon if we believe that life is the standard is energy. Cheap energy. Cheap, effective energy. That's the holy grail. That's the one thing you cannot give up if life depends on it. So if you're going to deal with climate change, if it's a problem, then you have to deal with it without shutting down your energy supply, because that's just suicide. And you can't save life by committing suicide. So you can't save human beings by killing human beings. If you abandoned fossil fuels, that would be the equivalent of killing hundreds of millions of people. A far, 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 I don't know how many fars we can do, greater disaster than the ice caps melting. So the reason environmentalists can't see that is that they don't hold human life as the standard. If they did, then it's obvious. It's obvious that fossil fuels are more valuable than ice caps. Because the fossil fuels make it possible for you to solve the problems created by the melting of the ice caps. All right. It has been confirmed that humans are changing space weather now. Ooh. So many radio frequencies are being produced on Earth that an RF bubble has been set up that deflects high-frequency cosmic rays. All right. I have no knowledge of this, no understanding of it. So I have no real comment on it. I don't know what space weather even means, but yeah, there's a lot of radio frequencies. We're blasting a lot of stuff. And an RF bubble has been set up that deflects high-frequency cosmic rays, so that affects the weather in Earth or outside of Earth. Okay. Why do we care? I don't. I mean, unless you can show me why I should care, I don't care. The speed of products getting to the market, mass market, is pitiful relative to technological knowledge. Airplanes going the same speed as 40 years ago. Actually, they're going slower than 40 years ago. Every generation of Boeing airplanes since the 727 has been slower than the previous generation. The 787 is slower than the 777, which is slower than the 767, which is slower than the 757, and on you go. So it's worse than that. And yes, that's regulation. That's government control. I'll be talking about that. One of the interviews I want to do is with Boom, CEO of Boom, who is building a supersonic jet. So not true, Yaron. It's not true that Boeings are slow. I'm sure I saw that. That the Boeings, every generation of Boeing is slower. All right, I'm wrong. Lucas says I'm wrong. I must be wrong then. All right, I retract my statement about Boeing, but I will research this because I am convinced I saw that somewhere. So it's Luca versus my mythical sauce. All right. Yeah, all right. We're going to settle this, Luca. We'll have to settle this over a glass of wine in Geneva probably, but it will be settled. He's thrown down the gauntlet. He's told me I'm wrong. All right. Hi. Okay. There's a website here that says, let's see if they have it. Of course, who should I believe? The web, random article on the web, or Luca? Probably Luca. Yeah, it doesn't give it. All right. I didn't know you trained as a commercial pilot, but I know you know a lot of stuff, so I'm just trusting you. Okay, guys, that's it. No more Super Chat questions. It was a slow day. It's been a slow few weeks in Super Chat. I don't know where all the guys who usually ask tons and tons of questions, they probably drained their bank accounts completely and are gone. But thank you for the support. Remember that the best way to support me is a monthly contribution. Please do so. I again, value for value. You can do so on youronbrookshow.com/support, on Patreon, on Subscribestar, on Locals, and that'd be great. I'll see you all tomorrow. We're doing tomorrow. We've got 100 plus a month contributors on our Hangout tomorrow. So tomorrow is the Hangout with $100 supporters. That will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Pacific. 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Pacific. We'll do our Hangout tomorrow. Should be fun. Lots of different questions. We'll go all over the place. It'll be a blast. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget to press the like. Helps with algorithms. It really does. Like the show.